Hi, everyone, and welcome to Experts Unplugged, leadership speaker spotlights from the Tri-State Camp Conference, where I, as one of the fellow speakers at the conference, I'm going to highlight some of our amazing speakers from the upcoming conference, which is through the American Camp Association's New York and New Jersey chapters. It's taking place March 12th to 14th at the Atlantic City Convention Center in New Jersey. And our chat here today really focuses on leadership and how our expertise impacts others to think like leaders. So many of you know me. I'm Joanne Newborn. I am the CEO of Newborn Evolution, where we help smart leaders build teams that think strategically, they problem solve effectively, and they really take true ownership of their outcomes. So today I am super excited to be talking to Mike Fogel about his talk, which is navigating complex HR issues. Mike is a board certified art therapist, a licensed professional counselor, an entrepreneur, an author with over 2 decades of clinical experience. He treats a wide range of childhood emotional behavior challenges at his private group therapy practice in Philadelphia and a child and family art therapy center. Mike is an expert in treatment and advocacy for neurodiverse children with autism, ADHD, and learning differences. And his work, I love this, his work is supercharged by heartfelt faith that every person has the innate capacity to heal, grow, and progress towards their vast personal potential. I mean, that really resonates for me and some of the things that we do at Newborn Evolution. It's really beautiful. His love for this population propelled Mike to create the comprehensive art of friendship social coping program and its curriculum. And he is the author of Social Emotional Guidebook, Motivate Children with Social Challenges to Master Social and Emotional Coping Skills. So he implores everyone to create a better world together. So thank you so much for sharing time with me today, Mike.
hmm Hi, all. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm sure other people are as curious as I am in really understanding what the terms neurodiverse and neurodivergent mean, and what do children with ADHD, autism, and learning differences all have in common?
Okay. Thanks for having me. Great question. Happy to share. So these terms are now sort of floating out in pop culture, but I don't think that everyone knows what they mean.
Hmm.
So neurodiverse speaks to the fact that every person is wired in a unique way in terms of their brain functioning. And the term comes out of actually the autism community, speaking to the fact that there's the autism spectrum, and each person on the spectrum um, processes, thinks, and behaves slightly differently. But it also speaks to how everyone has their own sort of mental cognitive strengths. Some people have great memories. Some people are excellent at math, but weaker at writing. Some people are strong at writing, weaker at math, poor memories. Social skills also falls along that line. So neurodiversity speaks to the wide range of ways that people process. Now, the other term is neurodivergent. Neurodivergent actually exists in contrast to another term, which is neurotypical. So the average person whose brain wiring doesn't have a learning difference or ADHD or autism is considered neurotypical. They have average functioning and they basically process the world in sort of a mainstream way, meaning that the large majority of the bell-shaped curve sort of think in this way. But nearly a third to a quarter of the population think and process differently. And so neurodivergent speaks to that set of people that diverge from that mainstream thinking. They think and process differently. So neurodiverse and neurodivergent are sometimes used somewhat synonymously. They mean slightly different things. But those diagnoses that you asked about,
Hmm.
autism, ADHD, and learning differences and others, all are brain-based disorders or challenges. And so they are neurological. Their brains, someone's brain wiring, and across all of those, they would fall under the umbrella term neurodiverse. or neurodiversity as well.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, fascinating. And I actually, in my talk, I'm touching upon diversity, right? And when I talk about diversity, I talk about all kinds of diversity because we tend to just think of it in one particular way. So this is really, really interesting.
Mhm.
I'd also
Can
love
I
to,
jump in
yeah,
can
yeah.
I jump in on that topic actually? All these neurodiversities, in a way, they're sort of invisible differences because on the surface, you might walk up to someone and they might look like an average person, right? They're like very handsome, charming, cute kid. So on the surface, you may not expect, oh, there's going to be a difference. The way that neurodiverse people present is they behave or speak somewhat differently than the average person, and you don't know that they're different until they start to interact, and then often they're subject to discrimination. People see them and they think, oh, what's wrong with them? Or they're weird. There's a problem. They're different. And so this population often is really in quite a negative cycle with the world where a lot of grown-ups are catching and correcting them all the time. Get
Mm,
back in your seat, get back in your seat, stay with the group. That was inappropriate. Say you're sorry. So there's a lot of correction that they're subject to all the time because they're not behaving in the same sort of expected way as that neurotypical population.
yeah,
And so that's actually a form of ableism. It's a form of discrimination
yeah.
when they're constantly corrected for things that they can't control. And that's actually a part of my talk is how at the camp conference, how can camp staff support neurodiverse kids and help them really succeed um, and get the most out of camp.
Yeah, and really work with these biases, right? That
Mhm.
are existing that we talk about unconscious bias and it
Yeah.
probably is very unconscious, when they're on the receiving end of what's going on and that just kind of snowballs into other things. So it's a great segue to the next thing I wanted to ask you is why do neurodivergent children struggle socially and they argue with bunkmates or they stop following directions or maybe they have a meltdown? Why does that happen?
Hmm. So across these different diagnoses that I mentioned under this neurodiverse umbrella, they process the world differently. And there are
Mhm.
certain sort of thinking styles, and the way that they understand the social world and take in social information is different. And a few of the key ways are one, reading social cues. This population might not see the same facial expression or body language from someone else and recognize it. And in many cases, not all, I'm speaking with a broad brush now, not every child presents with all of these qualities that I'm mentioning, but they all might have one or some of them. They might be have a high need for consistency, and so they need routine. And so when schedules change on them, that can be quite anxiety provoking. So
Wow.
for the
Yeah.
average child who can kind of go with the flow, if there's a special activity that changes the schedule and it wasn't, you know, super planned out or announced, that can be anxiety provoking, and that child can have tantrums or be inflexible. Speaking of that, inflexibility, rigid thinking is often a core challenge for this population. And so going with the flow, knowing when it's time to compromise with a peer can be hard. So then that can make them argue. They can become argumentative. Another not often thought of issue with with this population is a great strength at seeing and observing details, but then missing the big picture of socialization or interactions. And so kids with these challenges might argue a rule to the death. So they're playing sports, and then they'll get into the argument, that ball was foul. That was a foul ball. And everyone else is saying it's fair. They thought it was foul. They will argue that detail because they are going for justice. They think that that's right and correct, and rigidly so, inflexibly. And so everyone else is saying, come on, let's get on with the game. And the child is arguing. And so when people push that child to be flexible, sometimes that can provoke a tantrum. They can have a meltdown and get very angry. So working with the child around big picture expectations of competition and sports. Well, what's it supposed to be? Sports is supposed to be fun. There's supposed to be teamwork and sportsmanship. That's the big picture, right? But when you super zoom in and focus on these micro details, That's what can sometimes cause these arguments
Mhm.
in a bunk and cause the tension. So it's the way that they're thinking. And I really want anyone who works with a child to recognize that it's not the child's fault. The child is not choosing when they wake up at 8 in the morning, I'm going to have a doozy of a meltdown at 2:30 on the baseball field, right? That's the worst part of their day. That's a loss of control when that happens. And so I want everyone to have compassion for the fact that the child's thinking differently, they're doing their best, and there are certain cognitive gaps. They're missing certain social cues and certain understandings that if we can explain to them and teach them what's expected, this is how you can handle it. They love that information. That helps them to succeed. And so we can have compassion and patience and do a lot more explaining and teaching of the social expectations. And that's just one of the ways that we can really support neurodiverse kids.
That's fantastic. And as you were talking about that, there are so many parallels to in the workplace, in managing through change, because a lot of the reactions, and we're changing very rapidly today, in the corporate landscape, and a lot of the reactions are very much the same, especially if someone's been with an organization for a long time. It's like, no, that's not the way we do things. That isn't the way we do things around here. And working with excuse me, managers and executives to help people along that change curve in very similar manner to the way you're talking about this. So very, very interesting.
Mhm.
Um, so what and you don't have to, if this is a big part of your talk, you can just give us a little sneak peek, but what can frontline camp staff do to support neurodiverse campers and social emotional needs so that their bunkmates can have the most successful experience this summer?
Right, right, great. So this is what's really going to be the meat of my
Mhm.
presentation. And just a note, I am one part of a panel discussion on that larger title that you mentioned,
Oh,
including
nice, nice.
service
Mhm.
animals and other sort of legal aspects. But I am there to sort of represent this community of children, the neurodiverse community. And what I'm going to talk about are really the five biggest things that a a bunk or group leader can do to sort of structure for success. What are some of the things that you can do to proactively help both the
Mhm.
individual child and the whole group know what's coming? Um, Predict when there could be a change. We're going to talk about visual strategies because a lot of this population, one of their strengths happens to be visual. And so seeing certain strategies or certain schedules or other cueing agents can really help them be successful. So we're going to get into that a little bit. And one of the big focuses of my career and my advocacy for this population is to create ultra positive reinforcement cycles to break that negative cycle that I mentioned earlier, where the constant correction and it winds up being a real negative focus on all the ways that they have social miscues.
Mm.
Let's flip it. So I'm going to mention and teach how to observe and catch them in success moments, how to language a certain type of verbal reflection that helps them to notice when they're on track. That helps them to stay on track. It helps them to feel like, oh, I'm getting credit for actually contributing to the community. So we're going to talk about creating positive cycles that reinforce use of social skills, help them to feel appreciated. Um, and actually, the same skills that I'm mentioning with this ultra positive reflection are appropriate and effective for all kids. So we don't have to make a neurodivergent child feel different. If you use it bunk wide and team wide, everyone is on the same page and we're lifting everyone's sort of social game and creating just a culture of acceptance and positivity.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Amazing. I could talk to you all day about this topic. I really find it fascinating. So I think that's all we have time for in our nugget. But I want to tell everyone that Mike's talk, he's going to be speaking on Wednesday, March 13th at 9:45 a.m. So make sure you catch him. And it's right after mine. I'm speaking at 8:30 that morning. So come bring your coffee. I'm going to be talking about creating rock stars, designing collaborative high performance teams. I want to thank you so much, Mike, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person in March.